March 17, 1943, Salamanca, Spain. Robert Dunham's leather briefcase felt heavier than usual as he stepped off the narrow-gauge railway onto the platform at Barrucopardo station. The American commercial attaché adjusted his hat against the bitter wind sweeping down from the Sierra de Francia mountains and surveyed the landscape before him. Slag heaps rose like gray monuments around the Tungsten mine entrance. Rough wooden structures housed crushing equipment that operated around the clock. The air tasted of diesel exhaust and stone dust. This changes everything, Dunham thought, watching a convoy of trucks loaded with wolframite ore rumbling toward the Spanish border. We're not buying this to use it, we're buying it so they can't have it. The mine foreman, Miguel Rodriguez, emerged from the administrative building, his weathered face breaking into a cautious smile. He had received Dunham's telegram 2 days earlier. The Americans' offer was extraordinary, 50 times the pre-war price per metric ton of tungsten concentrate. Rodriguez had spent 30 years in these hills and had never seen anything like it. What Dunham understood, what the mine foreman couldn't fully grasp, was that this obscure mineral, this gray-black ore that most people had never heard of, was as strategically vital to the war effort as steel, rubber, or petroleum. Tungsten, with its melting point of 3,422 degrees Celsius and extraordinary density of 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter, possessed properties that made it irreplaceable for 2 critical military applications. First, tungsten carbide cores for armor-piercing projectiles. Without tungsten, anti-tank shells couldn't penetrate hardened armor plate. German panzer divisions relied absolutely on tungsten-tipped ammunition to destroy Allied tanks. Second, cutting edges for precision machine tools. The high-speed steel used to manufacture aircraft engines, tank transmissions, and artillery mechanisms required tungsten carbide tooling. No tungsten meant no precision manufacturing. Germany's minimum annual requirement was estimated by Allied intelligence at 3,500 metric tons of tungsten concentrates. The Reich's entire war machine, every Tiger tank, every Focke-Wulf fighter, every U-boat diesel engine, depended on a steady supply of this mineral. And most of Europe's accessible tungsten deposits lay in the hills of northwestern Spain and northern Portugal, in neutral countries that were willing to sell to the highest bidder. The United States Board of Economic Warfare, established on July 30, 1941, under Vice President Henry Wallace, had developed a strategy of elegant simplicity, preclusive buying. Purchase every ounce of tungsten available worldwide, regardless of price, so Germany couldn't acquire any. It was economic warfare, and it was about to prove more effective than strategic bombing. The journey to Barrucopardo had begun 3 years earlier, in the autumn of 1940, when Allied strategists first recognized tungsten's critical importance. In November 1940, the United States Metals Reserve Company, an agency of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, secured Bolivia's entire annual tungsten output, approximately 3,500 tons, for a 3-year period. The contract was signed in La Paz on November 18, 1940, by RFC representatives and Bolivian mining officials. Bolivia had been exporting tungsten to both Allied and Axis powers. The American contract effectively cut Germany off from South American supplies. The price paid was substantially above market rates. Pre-war tungsten concentrate sold for approximately $18 per short ton unit. The Bolivian contract guaranteed $22.50 per unit, with escalation clauses that could drive the price higher. For the Bolivian mining industry, it represented an economic windfall. For the United States, It represented strategic foresight. By a similar arrangement completed in December 1940, the United States secured all of Argentina's tungsten production, up to 3,000 tons yearly, for the duration of the war. Before this agreement, Japan had been purchasing approximately half of Argentina's output for transshipment to Germany. The Argentine contract, signed in Buenos Aires on December 12, 1940, included provisions for immediate cash payment and guaranteed shipping through neutral ports. Argentina's tungsten mines, concentrated in the provinces of San Luis and Córdoba, shifted overnight from serving Axis interests to exclusively supplying the Allies. The strategic calculus was brutally simple. Intelligence assessments indicated Germany's total annual tungsten requirement at between 3,500 and 4,000 tons. Domestic German production from mines in Saxony and the Ore Mountains yielded approximately 1,200 tons annually. Occupied France perhaps 500 tons from mines near Limoges. That left a deficit of approximately 2,000 tons that had to be imported from neutral Spain and Portugal. The first major test of the preclusive buying strategy occurred in the spring of 1941, when German purchasing agents arrived in Oporto, Portugal, with authorization to buy tungsten at any price. Portugal's wolframite mines, scattered through the northern districts of Trás-os-Montes and Beira Alta, had produced approximately 2,800 tons in 1940. The German agents offered 1,500 escudos per metric ton, triple the pre-war price. British commercial attachés, operating under instructions from the Ministry of Economic Warfare in London, immediately countered with offers of 2,000 escudos per ton. The Germans raised their bid to 2,500. The British went to 3,500. Within 6 weeks, the price of Portuguese tungsten concentrate had risen from 500 escudos per ton to 7,000 escudos, a 14-fold increase. Portuguese miners, many of whom had scratched subsistence livings from small family operations, found themselves suddenly wealthy. Villages in the tungsten-producing regions experienced an economic boom unprecedented in Portuguese history. New buildings appeared. Imported goods flooded local markets. The phenomenon became known as the tungsten fever, and it was exactly what Allied economic warfare planners had intended. The pattern established in Portugal repeated itself across every tungsten-producing region accessible to both Allied and Axis buyers. In Spain, where Franco's government maintained official neutrality while sympathizing with the Axis, the bidding war reached extraordinary heights. The Barranco Pardo mine in Salamanca province, Spain's largest tungsten operation, produced approximately 800 tons of concentrate annually. In 1941, German agents from the ROAC purchasing organization offered Spanish mine owners 8,000 pesetas per ton. American and British buyers immediately countered with 12,000 pesetas. By the spring of 1942, the price had climbed to 35,000 pesetas per ton. By the autumn of 1943, it reached 85,000 pesetas, more than 100 times the pre-war price. Spanish tungsten miners became wealthy beyond their wildest expectations. Stories circulated of peasant farmers who discovered wolframite deposits on their land and sold single truckloads for more money than their families had earned in generations. In China, where Japanese occupation controlled most industrial regions, a clandestine tungsten smuggling operation developed extraordinary sophistication. The China National Aviation Corporation, using between 24 and 26 C-47 Dakota aircraft supplied through the Lend-Lease Agreement, flew dangerous missions over the Himalayas, the notorious hump route, transporting tungsten concentrates from mines in Yunnan and Jiangxi provinces to Allied facilities in India. These flights, coordinated by staff officers under General Joseph Stilwell's command, transported approximately 300 tons of Chinese tungsten monthly between May 1942 and October 1944. The air crews faced appalling conditions: unpredictable mountain weather, Japanese fighter patrols, mechanical failures at extreme altitude, and navigation over unmapped terrain. Several aircraft were lost, but the tungsten kept flowing to Allied arsenals. Allied intelligence officers monitoring the effectiveness of the preclusive buying program documented its impact through intercepted German communications and reports from agents in neutral countries. By mid-1942, German armaments officials were expressing concern about tungsten availability. Albert Speer's Ministry of Armaments and War Production issued directives in August 1942 requiring immediate development of tungsten substitutes for non-critical applications. The advantage depended entirely on maintaining price pressure and supply disruption. As long as Allied purchasing agents could outbid German buyers, and as long as neutral countries continued honoring contracts with the highest bidder, Germany's tungsten shortage would worsen progressively. The mathematics favored the Allies. American economic resources vastly exceeded Germany's capacity to compete in commodity markets. But by late 1943, the situation required escalation. By December 1943, the strategic picture had shifted decisively. Allied intelligence assessments indicated that despite the preclusive buying program's success, Germany was still obtaining approximately 2,000 tons of tungsten annually from Spanish and Portuguese sources, enough to sustain minimum armaments production. The problem was political. Spain's Franco regime, while officially neutral, maintained extensive trade relationships with Germany. Spanish exports to the Reich included not only tungsten but also iron ore, mercury, and various agricultural products. German payments for these materials helped sustain Spain's struggling post-Civil War economy. Franco faced a delicate balancing act, maintaining trade with Germany while avoiding actions that might provoke Allied intervention. The revelation that forced a confrontation came from signals intelligence. British cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park, reading decoded German diplomatic traffic, discovered that Spain had signed secret commercial agreements in November 1943, guaranteeing Germany continued access to Spanish tungsten at fixed prices, regardless of Allied bids. The agreements effectively circumvented the preclusive buying strategy by establishing government-to-government contracts that Spanish mining companies were obligated to honor. Carlton Hayes, United States ambassador to Spain since May 1942, received instructions from Secretary of State Cordell Hull on January 15, 1944. The message was unambiguous. Spain must terminate tungsten exports to Germany immediately or face severe economic consequences. Hayes, a Yale historian who had accepted the ambassadorship reluctantly, found himself thrust into high-stakes economic warfare. The initial diplomatic approach yielded unsatisfactory results. Spanish Foreign Minister Francisco Gómez Jordana, meeting with Hayes on January 28, 1944, offered a compromise. Spain would reduce tungsten exports to Germany to 1,000 tons annually, while continuing to sell unlimited quantities to the Allies. Gómez Jordana presented this as a significant concession, noting that Spain was a neutral nation under no obligation to favor either side. Secretary Hull rejected the offer in a cable dated February 2, 1944, that became famous in diplomatic history. It is not customary in the community of nations for a country to assume it is rendering a great service to its neighbors by not attacking them. Spain's continued trade with Germany prolongs the war and costs Allied lives. This will not be tolerated. The ultimatum that followed was brutally effective. On February 10, 1944, the United States imposed a complete oil embargo on Spain. All petroleum shipments ceased immediately. Spain's economy, heavily dependent on imported fuel, faced immediate crisis. Transport systems began shutting down within days. Industrial production slowed dramatically. The Spanish military, already operating on minimal fuel reserves, faced the prospect of complete immobilization. The pressure intensified when Britain joined the embargo on February 15th, cutting off Spanish access to coal shipments and other critical imports. Franco's government, caught between Germany's demands and Allied economic strangulation, had no sustainable options. The Spanish Victory Parade, scheduled for April 1, 1944, to commemorate the 5th anniversary of Franco's Civil War victory, became an inadvertent demonstration of the embargo's effectiveness. The grand military procession through Madrid proceeded without tanks, armored vehicles, or motorized artillery. Spain had insufficient fuel to operate them. Infantry marched on foot. Horse-drawn caissons replaced mechanical transport. The spectacle humiliated Franco's regime and demonstrated Allied economic power more effectively than any diplomatic note. The strategic requirements that made tungsten irreplaceable had emerged from fundamental physics and metallurgy that no amount of wishful thinking could circumvent. Tungsten's extraordinary properties derived from its atomic structure. With 74 protons and an atomic weight of 183.84, tungsten possessed the highest melting point of any metal, 3,422 degrees Celsius. Its density of 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter made it nearly as dense as gold and significantly denser than lead. These characteristics made tungsten uniquely suited for applications requiring extreme hardness and heat resistance. The German armaments industry had recognized tungsten's military value as early as 1936. The Heereswaffenamt, the German Army Weapons Agency, issued specifications in March 1936 for armor-piercing projectiles capable of penetrating 100 millimeters of hardened steel armor at 1,000 meters range. Conventional steel core ammunition could not meet these requirements. Only tungsten carbide possessed sufficient hardness and density. The development of tungsten carbide cores for armor-piercing ammunition represented a collaboration between Germany's major steel producers, Krupp, Röchling, and Polte, and the Army Weapons Office. Engineers faced the challenge of creating projectile cores that could maintain structural integrity under the enormous stresses of tank gun acceleration and armor impact, while maintaining aerodynamic stability in flight. The solution emerged from powder metallurgy techniques. Tungsten carbide powder, mixed with cobalt binder and pressed into cylindrical cores under extreme pressure, created projectiles with hardness exceeding 1,500 on the Vickers scale, harder than any armor plate then in production. These cores, inserted into steel-jacketed projectiles, gave German anti-tank guns their legendary armor-piercing capability. The mathematics were brutally simple. A standard German 75mm POC-40 anti-tank gun fired projectiles weighing 6.8 kilograms at muzzle velocities of 990 meters per second. The kinetic energy at impact, approximately 3.3 megajoules, required a penetrator material capable of maintaining structural integrity while punching through hardened armor. Steel cores deformed on impact. Tungsten carbide cores penetrated cleanly. The second critical application, precision machine tools, arose from equally stringent requirements. Manufacturing tank transmissions, aircraft engine crankshafts, and artillery breech mechanisms required cutting tools capable of machining hardened steel at high speeds without losing their cutting edge. High-speed steel cutting tools, even those alloyed with cobalt and molybdenum, dulled quickly when machining hardened components. Tungsten carbide cutting inserts revolutionized precision manufacturing. A lathe equipped with tungsten carbide tooling could operate at cutting speeds 3 to 5 times faster than conventional high-speed steel tools, while maintaining dimensional tolerances measured in thousands of millimeters. For Germany's armaments industry, attempting to produce tanks, aircraft, and weapons in quantities sufficient to match Allied production, this productivity increase was essential. The strategic vulnerability was obvious once recognized. Germany could not manufacture armor-piercing ammunition or maintain precision manufacturing capability without steady tungsten supplies. Domestic German mines produced approximately one-third of requirements. The remainder had to be imported from neutral countries, primarily Spain and Portugal. Allied economic warfare planners had identified this dependency by early 1941 and structured the preclusive buying program specifically to exploit it. The decision to buy tungsten at any price, regardless of immediate need, represented a calculated trade-off. Spending millions on tungsten the Allies might not even use was cheaper than allowing Germany to obtain it and having to face tungsten-equipped German tanks on the battlefield. The tungsten shortage's impact on German military capability manifested progressively through 1942 and 1943, accelerating dramatically in 1944 as the preclusive buying program achieved full effectiveness. In North Africa, German tank units fighting the British Eighth Army reported ammunition shortages as early as November 1942. The 21st Panzer Division, engaged in defensive operations near El Alamein, documented that only 40% of its armor-piercing ammunition contained tungsten cores. The remainder used conventional hardened steel cores with significantly reduced penetration capability. British intelligence officers examining captured German ammunition stocks after the Battle of El Alamein noted the shortage in reports dated November 15, 1942. The pattern repeated across every theater. On the Eastern Front, where German armored formations faced Soviet T-34 tanks with sloped armor difficult to penetrate, tungsten ammunition was critically important. The 4th Panzer Army, operating in southern Russia during the summer of 1943, received tungsten core ammunition allocations at only 30% of doctrinal requirements. Tank commanders reported that successful kills against T-34s required multiple hits, increasing exposure to Soviet return fire and raising German tank losses. Statistical analysis compiled by the German High Command in December 1943 revealed alarming trends. Tank kill ratios, the number of enemy tanks destroyed per German tank lost, had declined steadily since 1941. In Operation Barbarossa's opening months, German panzers achieved kill ratios approaching 5-to-1 or higher. By late 1943, ratios had fallen to approximately 1.5-to-1. Multiple factors contributed to this decline, but ammunition effectiveness was significant. The machine tool shortage created even more pervasive problems. Germany's aircraft production, attempting to meet impossible quotas demanded by Göring and Hitler, depended on precision machining of engine components. Daimler-Benz factories producing DB605 engines for Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters required tungsten carbide tooling to machine crankshafts and cylinder heads within tolerance specifications. As tungsten supplies diminished, tool life decreased and production rates slowed. Albert Speer's Ministry of Armaments and War Production issued directives in March 1943 requiring immediate development of tungsten substitutes. German metallurgists investigated vanadium, molybdenum, and chromium alloys as potential replacements. These materials could partially substitute for tungsten in some applications, but they were inferior. Vanadium steel armor-piercing cores, tested extensively at the Kummersdorf Proving Ground near Berlin in April 1943, achieved penetration values approximately 70% of equivalent tungsten cores. This meant German anti-tank guns required closer engagement ranges and more hits, both factors that increased crew casualties. The improved ammunition entered production in June 1943, but tank commanders recognized its limitations immediately. The attempt to use molybdenum alloy cutting tools in place of tungsten carbide proved even less successful. Tool life decreased by approximately 60%, meaning more frequent tool changes, increased downtime, and reduced production output. A machine tool that could operate continuously for 8 hours with tungsten carbide tooling required tool changes every 3 hours with molybdenum substitutes. The cumulative effect on aircraft and tank production was substantial. By early 1944, as the Allied oil embargo forced Spain toward the May 2, 1940 agreement limiting German tungsten imports to minimal levels, 20 tons in May, 20 tons in June, 40 tons monthly thereafter, German armaments officials recognized they faced a crisis that could not be solved through ingenuity alone. The final major tungsten-related operation of the war demonstrated both Germans' desperation and the metal's strategic importance. In December 1944, during the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, German tank units received priority allocation of remaining tungsten core ammunition stocks. The 1st SS Panzer Division received approximately 800 tungsten core 75mm rounds for its Panther tanks and 400 tungsten core 88mm rounds for its Tiger IIs. These represented the last significant stockpile of tungsten ammunition the Wehrmacht possessed. The offensive's ultimate failure meant these irreplaceable munitions were expended for no strategic gain.
The complete statistical record of the Tungsten War reveals its scope and effectiveness with clinical precision. Between November 1940 and May 1945, the United States Board of Economic Warfare and its successor agency, the Foreign Economic Administration, spent approximately $312 million purchasing strategic minerals through preclusive buying programs. Tungsten accounted for roughly $185 million of this total. The Metals Reserve Company purchased approximately 47,000 tons of tungsten concentrates from all sources during this period. The geographic distribution of Allied tungsten purchases breaks down as follows. Bolivia provided approximately 10,500 tons over the contract period. Argentina supplied roughly 9,000 tons. Portugal, despite German competition, sold approximately 11,000 tons to the Allies. Spain, after the May 1944 agreement, provided 8,500 tons. China contributed approximately 7,200 tons via the Hump airlift. And various smaller sources, including Burma, French Indochina through clandestine purchases, and scattered deposits in Australia and Canada, accounted for the remainder. Germany's tungsten acquisition during the same period totaled approximately 18,000 tons from all sources: domestic production, imports, and recycling of scrap. This represented roughly 38% of the estimated 47,000 tons Germany would have required to maintain armaments production at full capacity throughout the war. The 29,000-ton deficit forced extensive substitution programs, reduced ammunition allocations, and constrained precision manufacturing capability. Price inflation statistics demonstrate the preclusive buying program's market impact. In 1939, tungsten concentrate sold for approximately $18 to $22 per short ton unit on international markets. By December 1943, Spanish tungsten prices had reached $1,800 per unit, nearly 100 times the pre-war price. Portuguese prices peaked slightly lower at approximately $1,500 per unit due to British price controls. Even Chinese tungsten smuggled through Japanese-occupied territory commanded prices exceeding $1,000 per unit. The comparative analysis with German production reveals the strategy's effectiveness. German armaments production statistics, compiled from captured records after the war, show consistent shortfalls. Panther tank production, which required approximately 85 kilograms of tungsten per vehicle for ammunition and machine tooling, averaged 3,740 vehicles annually during 1943 to 1945, approximately 60% of planned production. Similar shortfalls affected aircraft, naval vessels, and artillery production. Allied bomber crews, ironically, never needed to locate and destroy German tungsten mines. The Saxon mines at Zenwald and Altenburg continued producing throughout the war, suffering minimal damage from strategic bombing. Economic warfare accomplished what strategic bombing could not. It denied Germany access to critical materials without expending aircraft, bombs, or crew lives. Survivor testimony from both sides confirms tungsten's strategic importance. Lieutenant Colonel Werner Ostendorf, Chief of Staff for ISS Panzer Corps during the Normandy campaign, stated in post-war interrogation, "Ammunition shortages, particularly armor-piercing rounds, severely constrained our operational capability. Tank commanders were instructed to conserve tungsten ammunition for engagement against heavy Allied tanks only. This forced us to accept unfavorable tactical situations we would previously have resolved through aggressive action." Conversely, American tank crews reported that German armor-piercing effectiveness declined noticeably during 1944. Technical Sergeant Robert Early, a Sherman tank commander with 3rd Armored Division, recalled, "We started hearing reports in late '44 that German armor-piercing rounds weren't penetrating as reliably. Some shells that should have gone through just gouged the armor and bounced off. Intelligence told us the Germans were using substitute ammunition because they couldn't get tungsten anymore."
The leather briefcase Robert Dunham carried to Barracupardo in March 1943 contained $240,000 in cash, payment for a single month's tungsten production from one Spanish mine. The money represented more than mere commodity purchase. It represented a strategic weapon that required no bombardiers, no fighter escorts, and cost no lives to deploy. When Spain finally signed the May 2, 1944 agreement drastically limiting tungsten exports to Germany, the economic war entered its final phase. German armaments production, already strained by strategic bombing and resource shortages, lost access to a material that could not be synthesized, could not be substituted effectively, and could not be conquered, because the Allies had simply bought it all. The final irony emerged in the war's aftermath. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, examining the effectiveness of various Allied strategies, concluded that the preclusive buying of tungsten and other strategic minerals contributed more to degrading German military capability per dollar spent than any other economic warfare program. The $185 million spent on tungsten purchases prevented German production of weapon systems worth an estimated $4 billion at contemporary values. German records captured in May 1945 revealed that tungsten shortages forced compromises in nearly every weapon system produced after 1943. Tank armor-piercing ammunition used inferior substitutes. Machine tools wore out faster, reducing production efficiency. Even the V2 rocket program, Hitler's last technological hope, suffered delays because precision manufacturing of turbopump components required tungsten carbide tooling that wasn't available in sufficient quantities. The battle for tungsten proved that modern warfare extends far beyond battlefields. Control of strategic resources, achieved through economic leverage rather than military conquest, can decisively influence war outcomes. The mining towns of Spain and Portugal, the smuggling routes over the Himalayas, the commodity markets where American agents outbid German purchasing officers, these became battlefields, as significant as Normandy or Stalingrad. The lesson transcends World War II. In an industrialized world where technological capability depends on access to specific materials with irreplaceable properties, controlling those materials controls military capability. The United States Board of Economic Warfare understood this in 1941. They structured a program that weaponized market economics, turning capitalism into an instrument of strategic warfare. And on the dusty platform at Barruecopardo Station in March 1943, when Robert Dunham handed Miguel Rodriguez a check for 50 times the pre-war price of tungsten ore, both men participated in a battle that would help win the war. The Spanish miner couldn't know it. The American attaché understood it perfectly. In the hills of Salamanca, where no shots were fired and no soldiers died, economic warfare was being waged with checkbooks and commodity contracts. The battle for tungsten proved that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet. It's the ability to buy every ounce of a critical mineral and deny it to the enemy. And in that single fact lies the entire story of how economic warfare shortened World War II and saved countless lives on battlefields most people never knew existed.